Bailleur. It's a very nice big picture I found of him. Philippe is a friend of mine, just like he's from Belgium, and he's been practicing his entire career in the fields of team, group and organization coaching. He's done that for about 20 years. He has more and more started to focus on the systemic field work of those kinds of coaching, and he has become specialized in what we call integrated coaching, integrated transformation from individuals, from leaders, from groups, and from organization perspective. He's also written 2 books. One is Architect of Your Organization, and the second one is about trauma in organization. For today's session, he will focus on how teams become the link between individuals and organizations, more specifically in a VUCA context. So please, Elizabeth, share the screen to Philippe. And Philippe, I wish you all the best with your webinar. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Carl. I'll click on the Show My Screen button, and it would be great to get an okay from your part that my slides are visible for everybody, so at least I'm sure everybody's seeing my slides.
Not yet.
Okay.
We see them.
You see them. Okay, that's great.
That's good.
Okay, so I'm ready. I would say good evening because it's evening over here, but anyhow, if it's noon or afternoon or morning, hello. I'd like to share some insights I have about teams and coaching of teams, insights that grew in my work based on my experience of the last, I would say it, 10 or 15 years. And just to share a little insight in who I am and how I developed myself as a coach, I'd like to share a little bit of my history. And I'm still looking on how to move my slides. That's how it is. I have been trained as an officer in the Belgian Army, more specific in the Air Force, which means that I learned to work with teams in a military context, more specific in a context that prepares people for crisis, for war, and so on and so on. So what I learned in those kind of topics is that the ability to erase your personality and work in service of the team, in service of the group, it's a way of working I never met until now, just in police corps, in police environments, or in fireman environments. I see the same dynamics. So that's where I learned a lot about teams, but after a while I left the army and I started working in a classic Belgian consultancy firm where I detected totally different dynamics in teams, and I started missing the brotherhood and the trust we had in this military context. Still there, I worked in a company, so I was an employee, and after some years I left that company too, and I became member of a networked organization, and a networked organization which means, or that was the aim, an organization without leadership. So that's the kind of organizations that are mentioned by Frédéric Laloux in his famous book, Reinventing Organizations. So I worked for a while in that kind of context, and I learned how teams behave in another way in those kind of contexts. And now I'm on my own with one colleague. So I left that networked organization, and I'm working on my own now with a colleague of mine, and we're just reflecting on how we would like to develop in the near future, but that's not clear at this moment. Why do I share this small history of myself? Just to express that I have been working in very different contexts. Anyhow, as a consultant or as a coach, you do so. but it gives me a very broad and deep experience of how teams can be different. And when I was working with the most team models I know, after a while I started thinking or becoming aware that maybe some of the team models we know aren't adapted to how our world is changing. And I started looking at teams that are successful in what we call a VUCA-world, and before diving into that, I like to go through those 4 letters again, because they are pretty important to reflect on them. So we all know the VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But anyhow, I would like to run through those 4 words because they have a huge impact on how teams are set up, and that's what I started finding in my work. So the first one, it's an easy one, and I think my drawings or my images are very clear. The speed of change is raising. Most of you will have known the long player. It took 40 years, but then replaced by the compact disc, which took only 20 years. Now we live in the iTunes world, and even that is already disappearing because we're moving. That's what I see with my kids. We are moving into a more not being owner of music empire or world. So I don't think iTunes or that logic will also change. What I like about these figures is that 40 years used to be the time people worked in a company. So you could have a career in a company without having huge changes. That has totally changed, not only for the individual person, but of course also for teams and also for companies. The second one, and that's the one I like the most in this VUCA word, is uncertain. Uncertain means that at a certain moment the way the market works can change, like in a week or in a month, which makes your value proposition you have to the market obsolete in one moment. As you can see, I have the example of Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, who didn't believe in an iPhone like we know it today, which would be, in his opinion, a much too expensive device. So they didn't invest in that development, which they are still trying to resolve nowadays. So there we talk about black swans, which means that the market can change in no time, and we don't know what the patterns of this new market will be like. We have a lot of examples, and I compare it with driving in the fog. So you have to speed up, but you don't know the road in front of you. So that's a second very important part of the world in which we are moving nowadays, in which teams have to find their way. The third letter is the C, which is an easy word to explain. We're getting into a complex word. More and more, it's more and more difficult to enter the market from several perspectives. If you want to launch something, you have law, you have safety, you have environmental criteria. So the world is becoming more and more complex, which means, and that's an important one, the level of complexity in which we are heading is a level that can't be dealt with by an individual person. And that's a very important part of the reason why teams are becoming that important. So the linkage between the members of the team is what we need to be able to deal with that complexity. What I see nowadays in a lot of companies is I see people working together in a team, but they aren't yet able to connect their, I would call it their brains, which means that the functioning of the team isn't achieving the level of complexity a team could achieve, which makes it difficult for leaders to trust in the ability of a team to achieve that higher level of functioning. I will go into deeper on that a little later. The last one, ambiguous. Ambiguous, I have a nice picture on that. What I see nowadays in a lot of companies is that they are organized, and you all know this, they are organized in silos. And I will build on what I explained about complexity. Each silo has his or her solution for a certain problem in the market or in the company, and so on and so on. So each silo has a perspective, but none of those perspectives is sustainable. The only sustainable solutions that, or the only solutions that will be sustainable are solutions that are built between those silos. And what I see in a lot of companies is that as long as a company is based on those, on that silo thinking, this knowledge of the sharing of those silos can grow, can develop, or can't emerge. And I think that I think that teams are the best place to start learning about the blending of those perspectives. So sustainable solutions need the space to be able to blend those several perspectives. Otherwise, we keep having fights between silos or between perspectives of silos. And I will go into that later on. So being aware of how this is changing the way companies work and the way teams have to work is kind of fundamental to understand how teams have to develop and change nowadays in companies. And what I see nowadays is that a lot of companies, most of them startups, are able to develop in this new way of working from the moment they are born or built. But older companies which are built in a classic way, they have to experiment with those new ways of working, and it's almost impossible to change a big company in one time, but it's possible to change a big company team by team. And that's the reason that I see teams as the building block to transition a company from, and I think this slide is very clear on that. So changing classic companies will be easy by experimenting with teams, and I will just read what I wrote down on my slides. So the way we do org design will force us to transition from conventional thinking to a living systems logic. And I think teams is an easy way, or the most easy way to learn to do it in a different way. And the learnings we do, or the learnings the company does by experimenting with teams, will help them to start trusting this new way of working and step by step reshaping their companies around those teams. Because companies are becoming a platform on which teams can develop. And the last 4 or 5 years, I started observing teams that are pretty successful in this VUCA world. And I'd like to share with you some of those patterns. And before diving in those patterns, I just want to take a moment to check if there are some questions. If yes, let's listen to those questions. If no, I would move on. So I check up with Karel now.
Yes, shoot, dear friends, shoot your questions. All great so far, Philippe.
Sorry?
All is great so far, it seems.
Okay, so
there's just one question to restate one more time what the VUCA acronym means.
Okay, it's a nice question. So I will run through the 4 words and then add something. So the V is for volatile, which means the speed of change is augmenting. The U is for uncertain, which means that we don't know the patterns of the emerging world. The C is for complex or complexity. And the A is for ambiguous. So ambiguous means that every perspective has its own truth, but none of those perspectives is true. Which means that we have to learn to blend those several perspectives to build sustainable solutions. And the reason why I'm running through those 4 words is what I see nowadays in a lot of companies. They use the word, but they don't understand the impact of it. Can I move on?
Yes,
Carlo?
you can move on. I will summarize other questions.
Okay, okay. So one of the roots, one of my roots is, one of them is NLP. And what I liked about NLP is the modeling of excellence. So the last years I started modeling teams, which I found excellent in dealing with this VUCA reality, and by doing so I started finding some patterns, and that's what I try to change to share with you. A word I start using more and more is developing. Means that you have to understand on what kind of behaviors, dynamics, patterns a person, a team, or a company has to develop. And what I want to share now is how this VUCA world is changing the way teams have to function. And I will run through them. I have 6 progressions. I will try to explain them one by one. The first important progression is the one that in old classic teams, there's more or less one input and output point, which is the manager of the team. Nowadays, in teams, every member of a team is kind of an input point, and which means that not all inputs can be filtered and blended by the manager, but has to be filtered and blended around the table. And that's a totally different game. So a second progression is that, and it follows, or it's based on my first progression. Managers used to be the expert. They have to become more and more facilitators. So all those inputs that come through the different team members can be blended. All those different perspectives can be blended. And as I refer back to what I shared about silos, what I see happening in teams that aren't yet adapted to a VUCA world is that you have a battle of perspectives, or a battle between silos, instead of a blending between silos, a blending between perspectives. So a manager who is still functioning as an expert doesn't have the skills to support this blending, which makes him more a manager than a facilitator. So that's a second progression. Which brings me to what I was already sharing about blending. When the manager was more or less responsible for the thinking and the doing of the team, he was kind of blending in his head, or blending in her head. So blending of perspectives was kind of an internal psychological process, which is becoming now a team process, and that's a pretty for a lot of managers, it's a pretty annoying process to see that what I used to blend in my head, I have to blend it with people around me. So I see a lot of managers losing patience in that journey. A fourth progression I see is that teams used to be more stable than nowadays, which means that the coming and going of people in teams is also going much faster than years ago, and there's an important part in that. What we neglect is that the coming and going of people in teams is also a relational process. Which means that if you put some new members in the team, then the team has to redevelop his what I call relational wiring. If we think about the phases through which a team goes, like forming, storming, norming, performing, I guess you know that model, that Tuckman model. So every time new people get into the team, you have a new team that has to redevelop. And if I see the amount of time that the poor amount of time that is invested in the development of team dynamics, it becomes even more difficult nowadays because the team needs much more development than some years ago because of this regular changes in team composition. Fourth progression is because there was a manager, a classic manager, there were a lot of what we call dependent and counter-dependent dynamics in teams. And the best way to compare, you have a lot of what we call parent-child dynamics in all teams, but in that dynamic, the blending we need isn't possible or isn't going in a very effective way. So we need much more interdependent relationships in which there's more harmony or less hierarchy between team members, and I will come back to that point later on in my presentation. And a last progression, and they are linked with each other, but the last progression is team members were there to execute the strategy of the company or the strategy of the manager. So team members were more like people to execute the strategy. Nowadays,
Philippe,
yeah?
There are some very interesting questions coming in. Is it okay for you?
Can I finish this one and then I will jump into questions, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so I run through that last progression. So team members were kind of the executors of the strategy. Nowadays, team members are co-creators of the strategy and how we will try to execute the strategy, which there also creates a totally different dynamic between manager and team members. So that was the last progression I wanted to share before kind of listening to some of those questions you apparently received, Karel.
Yes, Philippe, thank you. There's one truly beautifully formulated question, and we all know these things intuitively. You're describing beautifully what we've all witnessed. Now, a challenge is, what do you do about those leaders and people who are not confident that they can handle with all this VUCA things? And how do you deal with people that are fearful, people that resist, that are gripped in fear? They do not necessarily believe that VUCA will be positive for their status, certainty, autonomy, etc. How do you stabilize people? What do you do with people who do not seem to get comfortable with this VUCA world, and you still have to go on with them as well? Huh? So how do you stabilize people, basically?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the what I learn, and I'd like to link. That's the reason why I wrote my book on trauma. If I refer to the book of Frederic Laloux, so he showed the way to what he calls teal companies, and teal companies are companies that are more able to deal with this VUCA reality. And one of my insights of the last years, and that's the reason why I dived into organizational trauma, is that you can't reach teal. You can't reach teal without healing the wounds that are installed in companies, in teams, in people, and even in society. So it's the moment you see people getting rigid, which is the moment you see people getting rigid, linked to this VUCA reality, my immediate reflect is to check if old wounds, personal wounds, or wounds that are in the company hasn't been triggered. So I really think we as facilitators, coaches, we really have to open up for what I call healing work. So that's the first thing. The reason why, and a model that is a great model to dive into that, to start understanding what the impact is of this VUCA reality is, it's an Irish model, and I didn't put it in my slides, but it's a very important model. It's the Kinevin model, and I will spell it C epsilon, so of Yankee, N-E-F-I-N, and it's not Cinefin but Kinevin, because that's the way they express it in Irish. For me, at this moment, this is the best model to help people understanding how their world is changing. And what I learned step by step by reflecting on that, people start opening up for that, for that development. And I really think that some people, if they are not willing to heal their wounds, won't be able to function in that kind of reality. So they will become, like we had people that couldn't write had a problem in the world where reading became important. People who aren't able to work with a computer are having problems nowadays, and in the coming years, people who aren't able to deal with change, they will drop out of companies, and so we will have to take care of those people. I think by giving them the opportunity to heal their wounds. So that's part of my answer.
Thank you, Philippe.
Okay, other questions?
Well, yes, there are quite some questions coming in. There is yes. Do you have any idea, Philippe, how intensively this VUCA reality is present everywhere? Are there still environments, corporate environments, profit, non-profit, wherever, where these four dimensions until now are not omnidominant, or is it really an overall tendency? Is it really a reality that you find everywhere and that we will have to face? What is your feeling there?
Well, this could sound arrogant, what I will say nowadays, but I have the luck that I'm a pretty intelligent person and a fast learner, which makes me feel pretty comfortable when I'm confronted with complexity. So in my work, I had a kind of comfort the last years, and step by step, I start meeting clients with questions which have a totally different impact on me. It's like the last years I start seeing things around me, and the only reflex I have, shit, this is too complex for me. So, and to be honest, starting to see that around me and starting to see directors or managers around me that start feeling the same, damn, I can't do it on my own anymore. For me, it's the doorway to open for another way of collaborating with each other. So as long as you can deal with this complexity on your own, you don't feel the need to change. But I start feeling that need around me more and more, which shows me I see it in all kinds of companies because of legislation, because of speed, because of, so I see it in all. I even see it, and I even see it in governmental contexts, which are pretty stable environments. I start even seeing it over there, that it's kind of a tsunami of complexity, and I see a lot of companies kind of getting paralyzed.
Mm-hmm. There are two more questions, Philippe. One more practical one, that is, could you respell this Cinefin model, or could you refer to an author that people can Google it themselves because it's kind of difficult to spell?
And anyhow, if at the end I will share my email address. If you still have questions on those, feel free to mail me your questions. But I will spell it like we did it in the army: Charlie, Yankee, November, Echo, Foxtrot, India, November.
That's great, Philippe. And another question, if that's still okay for you, there is some admiration for the formulation of to heal wounds, to heal the hurtings that you've had. Now, how exactly can team coaching contribute to the healing of wounds? Isn't that something that is rather done by individual coaching?
Well, we have to take care we don't end up in another topic, which is trauma, organizational trauma. So it's something that puzzles me too. I'm an organizational coach, but when I'm doing that kind of healing work, maybe I'm an organizational therapist. So we will have to reflect on the boundaries of the label coach. But for me, it's from time to time it's pretty difficult to stay in that theoretical coaching boundary, because we have to do what we have to do. So I really think in a lot of teams this healing work will be needed, and it means working with old pain, old emotions that can, because companies like to look in the future. Companies are very goal-oriented and neglect the pain they create within their boundaries, and if at a certain moment, if we don't look at the mess they made, they get paralyzed due to these wounds.
Okay, Philippe, thank you.
I move on?
Yes.
And maybe later on I'll have to do a kind of webinar on organizational trauma. Okay, let's move on. Okay, what I shared when I went through those progressions, those 6 progressions, what is very important to be aware of, that a lot of processes that were dealt with in the head of the manager of a team has to be dealt with between the team members, which means that starting to learn what a manager did between his ears or her ears, becoming aware of that, these internal strategies will be important to understand what we have to nurture in the development of teams. And what helped me a lot, and it's again a pretty easy model, but if you take, for example, the management roles of Quinn, I think it's 8 roles. So what was dealt with by a manager now has to be dealt with by all members of the team. So team coaching is kind of helping the team to develop what used to happen in the head of a manager. I can't explain it in a better way. So by doing that and by reflecting on that, I started understanding the deep structure of what I call bio-teams. And I call it bio-teams because these are teams that are able to work in a VUCA world and are more working like a living system. And now I'm getting into the core of my presentation. So we found 6 meridians or progressions on which teams can develop, and I will run through them step by step. The first one is if you start working with a team, do you feel a desire or do you see a desire to achieve something special? What is important here, I see a lot of teams where the goal of the team is defined outside the boundaries of the team, first of all. Second, the goal of the team, or the goal of the team isn't developed within the team. At that moment, a lot of the potential positive dynamics of a team won't be able to develop. So I put some information in my slide. That's something you can read. But an important aspect is a team able to develop its own why, its own goals in relationship with the stakeholders of the team, in relationship to the company through which it belongs. And in my opinion, a very nice intervention to do with a team in which you miss this why is to invite the members of the team to start talking with their stakeholders and to start exploring how they could help their stakeholders. It's a very paradoxical intervention, working with the team, not by working with the team, but by inviting them to visit their stakeholders. More and more I start liking paradoxical interventions in the way I coach teams. A second progression is what I call, do you see positive collaboration? And when I'm talking about positive collaboration, do you see mutual care? Do you see a good balance between we and I? Because I see a lot of teams where there's only we and no I, but I see also a lot of teams where there's a lot of I and no we. Here I refer to, there's also room for tough love, which means that people are able to give feedback to each other. People are able to challenge each other, and people are able to support each other. I link it to the famous model of Lencioni. A team who isn't able to deal with constructive conflict isn't able to blend perspectives. So if I'm referring back to those silos, teams who aren't able to deal with tension and conflict aren't able to blend perspectives, so aren't able to develop the value those teams have to bring in this VUCA world. And precisely in this field, conflict, I see a lot of trauma in companies. Third progression is shared leadership, and shared leadership is like leadership isn't a rigid role anymore. It's more like something fluctuating between members, which means that the formal manager, if you observe a bio team and you don't know who the manager is, it's almost impossible to define who the manager is. If you work in a classical team, it's very easy to see, oh, that will be the formal manager, because if somebody asks a question that is a little bit difficult, everybody looks in his or her direction. In a bio team, there can be a manager, or there is a manager, but from time to time you can't even see it who he is. Next progression is, and this is, for me, this is an important one, and in my learning, a new one in the way I look at teams, and it's linked to the first one about the goal of the team is, how is the relationship with the outside world? In my first slides on this model, I used to use the metaphor of a skin. What I like, does the team has a skin? And what I like about the metaphor of the skin is that a skin can breathe, and a skin can transpire. So there's an in and out in a healthy skin. What I see in teams that aren't prepared for a VUCA world is they start closing their doors because the world is overwhelming them, or because they have no boundaries, which makes them being overwhelmed by the surrounding world. So from the moment you see a team moving to closing of boundaries or losing its boundaries, you have to be aware that the team will kind of lose a healthy way of functioning. And the last one, that's something I just explained, and you can read. The last one I see, and this one is based on solution-focused work or appreciative inquiry. What I see in teams that are functioning in a healthy way in a VUCA world is that there's much more positive interaction than negative interactions. You could kind of count them. So a positive interaction is an interaction which is appreciative and which builds energy to move on. A negative interaction is paralyzing, is kind of blocking the energy to co-create, to open up, to feel vulnerable, and so on and so on. So what I see is if there's enough positive interaction, people trust each other and dare to challenge each other because they know there's kind of a safe, there's a safe relationship to do so. If there's only negative interactions, then there's no room for vulnerability, and that's what we need to jump or to thrive in a VUCA world. And then I have a last one. Last one, a difficult one, but an important one, is do you see in that team a shared mindset or shared values? What I see in teams, if there's no shared mindset, then they won't build any progress. They will fight. You will have a fight between perspectives. You will have a fight between value sets. So building a shared value set is something pretty important, and what I learned, and it's the same in couples, this shared value set gets nurtured by diving into what I call crucial conversations or even constructive conflicts. So a team that doesn't go into that tension or conflict zone isn't able to develop this shared mindset or shared values. And then you keep having silos which aren't connected with each other. So you don't have this intersubjectivity, which is important which is important to deal or to thrive in a VUCA world. So referring back to those six progressions, like we call them, and as you can see, they are scaled from 0 to 10. What I do in my work is I share this vision with the people I work with, or I share it with the management team of a company, or I share it with the team members, and then once you share the vision, you can almost immediately invite them to map those six progressions by just asking them, where do you think you are with your team? And what I learned is people can map where they are very easily. Now we are developing, and it's ready, but we are developing a questionnaire so we can map teams even more faster by sending them an online questionnaire. And the output we get from this questionnaire is that it's pretty easy to build a team coaching based on what we learn by looking through those 6 meridians. And once we did a measuring, you have you can reassess a team after a while and build together with them on those different progressions. So what I start learning is once the team starts understanding those 6 progressions, they can kind of start dealing with the progression of the team or the development of the team on their own. It makes them more autonomous, and I think it's an important part of the work of a coach, that you don't create dependency, but you help them to auto-develop. And I think by designing this instrument and this tool, we really achieved that goal. The last thing I would like to share, and then I think we are almost at the end of my webinar, is we're in a lean startup phase of this team scan. So we designed an automated and online tool to map where teams are. We have been testing this model for 5 years now and start having nice results with it. It's like we found words to make team development more practical. And by making it more practical, it's more easy for companies to dive into that kind of development and to go a little further than classic team buildings. What we are also fond of is that we can do an intake with this tool in a short period without a big investment, because otherwise you have to do a lot of intakes. So we can gather a lot of information about the functioning of those teams by doing this online questionnaire, and we can give them the opportunity to do some follow-up. So what we're planning to do is to train some people to look through through this lens, and we are developing a next level of the team tool by giving stakeholders of the team the opportunity to give feedback on the team we are working with, which will make it a 360-degree feedback tool for teams. And I think there's a lot of potential in opening up for 360-degree feedback on the functioning of teams too. So I think there's a field opening over there in coaching of teams that is a field with a lot of potential for coaches, for team coaches, and we'd like to support that professional development. So if people are interested in Cynefin or other parts are shared, feel free to mail me or to connect with me. We can discuss a little deeper on what we shared or what I shared during this webinar. Which brings me to the end of my webinar, and maybe still a moment to ask me some questions.
Yes, okay, thank you, Philippe. Just for all clarity, your email address, yes, I see it here. Your email address is part of the presentation. That's good. There are some questions coming in on those six progressions that you mentioned. Now, I suggest that the people with questions on those progressions, there's a lot of them, please send an email to Philippe, so then Philippe can formulate one answer and bring that answer to all of you with the same question. Further, there is also a question on responsibility and accountability, Philippe. When you are in transition from an old way of traditional teamwork to the new way, the bio teams in the VUCA world, I can imagine that in terms of responsibility and accountability, things may not always be very clear. How do you manage, or how do you coach responsibility and accountability and things like objectives in this VUCA world with bio teams? And what about transition?
An important one. For me, the development of accountability is linked to the transparency on metrics. What I see happening in old or classic teams is that the only one who has an eye on the metrics to develop the functioning of the team is the manager, and it's pretty simple. Teams develop linked to the information they receive. So if you want a team to become more accountable, you have to share them the metrics, so they find how they can become more effective. What I see in a lot of classic companies is that they don't want to share metrics, because in those metrics it becomes clear that some people are earning, for example, a lot of money that doesn't come back to the people putting a lot of energy in the realization of those goals. So these bio teams can't grow in a world that doesn't share the information on metrics the team needs to become more self-regulated. Mm-hmm. First. Second, if you start sharing those metrics, you have to learn people to deal with those metrics. Otherwise you could create a lot of stress in a short period of time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Then another one, I think also an interesting question for the link between teams and organizations. Suppose that you start up somewhere a pilot project with a few selected teams that are considered to make the progress from traditional to VUCA team working. How is the learning in one team that is really making a successful transition? How is the learning being shared over the rest of the organization? What are your experiences there?
Yeah. What your question makes me think of is that if a company starts on that journey, you can start with a team, but after one or two teams, the management team have to go on the same track. If they don't follow on the same track, they won't be able to create the organizational context in which those teams can thrive. First one. Second one, I think I like the logic of network learning. I think those teams, from time to time, you have to bring teams together to share learnings. And to share insights, and I think those meetings have an effect on teams and have an effect on organizational culture. So bringing people together is an important part of this development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, another one that is also a little bit related to the other model that you brought up, the one of Lencioni. So one of the foundations of a good functioning team is trust. It's the beginning of it all, and also adherence to common values. How can what you've been telling us now about teams in the VUCA world and teams in transition, how can that contribute to creating trust where apparently it isn't established yet at this moment? So how can the transition from traditional team to VUCA team, you understand what I mean with that, how can that transition contribute to the creation of trust?
I will make a strange link, but I learned a lot about trust in my military past. Trust is something that grows when people go through, I would even call it a crisis. Teams that go through a very intensive, challenging period, they build trust with each other. So yes, as a coach or a trainer or whatever, you can work with MBTI insights and so on. But this opens the door to create trust. But I think deep trust is built when a team goes through crisis together, through crisis, through challenging times. if you would reflect on the teams in which you functioned, I think you will see that the teams with which or with whom you had a tough time, these are the teams in which you have another connection with the people around you, because you were there for each other.
Okay, great, thank you. I get some questions from people for the second passwords. Just for your timing, I will right away give the second password. Your timing, Philippe, do you have any more time left to remain for remaining questions, or do you have time obligations that make you leave within 2 minutes? How was your clock?
I'm at home, so feel free. To ask.
Okay, that's great. So I will first